two themes on sustainable energy and climate action plans. The first, what and why are we communicating? And then after that, we'll take a break and Brian will come on with how we do it and the development of a framework, an effective framework.
Sorry, Noel, we can't see you at the moment, but you can carry on anyway. But
oh, okay, maybe that's better for everybody concerned, Brian. That's fine.
Maybe.
Okay, so people will be able to concentrate on the slides. So just an introduction then. There's a large number, so we won't be going through everybody individually, but what we would like is you to engage during the morning, just to make it makes it more interesting for everybody. And if we can have sort of your comments and feedback where we just prompt for them, that would be good, and just makes it easier for myself and Brian as well to know that we're not sort of just broadcasting out to space there. So this morning we're going to look at the communicating sustainable energy and climate action plans, and we are going to go right back to basics, because what we want to do is ensure that people are climate literate, and if they understand why we're doing something, then they're much more likely to get involved in delivering it. And then, as I said, Brian will follow up that with a framework of how we actually have a process to make sure our communications are doing the job we want them to do. So the first theme then, we're going to begin with the end in mind, and then we look at weather and climate, and then the carbon cycle, global and local impacts, climate change and health. And just as a sort of word of introduction, my name is Noel Byrne. Some of you I know already. My background is in building services engineering, mechanical and electrical services, but have been working on energy efficiency since the mid-90s. And indeed, looking at some of the people joining there, all you young climate strategists, I'm very jealous. But you're entering a really interesting career and at a really interesting point in terms of climate action plans. And I mean, when Brian and I started out, it was all about energy conservation, which was a bit of a negative message, really. And then in the 90s, it all went to energy efficiency. Everything was about business efficiency, and energy wasn't going to be left behind, so it became energy efficiency. And then we had the big move into carbon management, and now everything is sort of all about the carbon and sort of decarbonization, which is a bit of a negative word, really. Purification of the air might be a better one, but anyhow, that is the sort of the language that we're using. So Brian, if you want to say hello there.
Yes, I'm Brian McNamee. I work with Noel in Consultico, and we worked in the 90s, as Noel said, on the energy efficiency best practice program in the UK, mainly for the Department of Environment. And then we started working for SEAI and other organisations in Ireland in the beginning of 200, and working a lot on staff engagement and getting management and staff on board with energy, environmental and sustainability action and climate action as well.
Yep, thanks, Brian. I should also say, in sort of the local authority world, I am a PSM for a number of different local authorities through SEAI program. Okay, let's begin with the end in mind. So, we're talking about sustainable climate action plans, sustainable energy and climate action plans. What do we want to get out of those plans? What do we want them to look like? How do we want people to engage with them? What actions do we want people to take? How are we going to persuade them to take it? So let's just have a look at a couple of slides here. First of all, let's not underestimate the job that we've been given to do. It's a huge challenge. And when we're talking about a complete transformation of the way we live our lives in all aspects. So that's the first thing we need to acknowledge. There is a serious amount of work for us to do. And I want you just to take a moment to look at this slide. So this is annual, so not Irish emissions, this is global fossil fuel emissions. And if you see here, see the financial crisis here? So there was a dip. And this is what happened during the COVID pandemic. You can see that dip there. Now, remember, during the pandemic, we went from our motorways being bumper to bumper, traffic jams, to empty. We went from our transit hubs or airports, from hustling transit hubs or bus stations or train stations, to ghost towns. We switched off the lights, we closed the doors, and we pulled down the shutters on our leisure centres, our hotels, our restaurants, and we closed down the economy for a year. And that had an impact on our emissions of 7%. So a 7% reduction during COVID, and we are looking for a 50% reduction by 2030 on the pathway to 2050. So that is a huge challenge. I think you'll agree. So that is something we need to be very careful in how we plan it and how we deliver it. And it can be done. Some authorities and municipalities are already well down the road, and that's something we need to sort of follow their lead. Okay, so there are many regions too that aren't on track. So, and the three great barriers really are resource capacity, upskilling. Are the skills out there? Are the contractors out there to deliver our deep retrofits? Are they available when we want them? Are the project managers there to project manage these? Is the money there? Is the investment capital available? We've a lot of stakeholders to involve. How are we communicating with them? Within a local authority, are you developing a single strategy for your net zero ambitions with all the sort of departments within that? Or is each department developing its own strategy? And I certainly wouldn't recommend the latter. You really just want one strategy with everything in it. And then, of course, we have the requirement for financing as well. So regions are complex systems, and so are there net zero transitions. So we need to look at all the different transition points and how we can marshal all that information, build a plan, and then obviously just planning isn't going to do it. We need to take action and deliver on that plan. So regardless what sort of platform you're using to develop your climate action plans, this is the one we work with. You may be using other ones. The terminology will be similar. First of all, you need to understand your emissions. What are the main data points for stationary energy, transport, waste? Is there heavy industry in your area? Is there a power station in your area? Things that are locally specific that we would need to include. So that's all the sort of the collation of the data set, and then from the data set, then we can manipulate that data in a format to design our pathway, build our plan, and then we need to sort of work with all our stakeholders. So it has to be sort of transparent, visual, understandable, and scientifically based. And we then need to monitor our delivery and to see how we're doing. Do we need to adjust our plans as we go along? We want a system that can be adjusted infinitely easily. So what sort of platforms are we using to do that? So just can I just ask people there on the call, whereabouts would you be on your climate action planning journey? Has anyone started to do the baseline surveys? Come on, you can't. I know it's early, but you can't all be that shy. Brian, you're on mute there.
Yeah, a couple of responses in the chat. Peter Martha, yes. Business complete. David Mellett. Paddy Lynch, not sure. Baseline emission inventories. Mary Darcy. Baselines are being done. Morgan Lahif. Suzanne Dempsey, baselines completed for LACAP. And David Carr, baseline procured and underway. Okay, so a good start then on developing your emissions data. So
basically, we need to be able to tell a story of how our region is tackling our net zero pathway. So we need a plan to bring everyone together so we build a greener future. So the big question is, can we reach zero emissions and still fulfill our citizens' needs of eating well, getting to work, heating and cooling our homes, building houses and managing waste? So that's the big question. And in the climate development, the National Development Plan, Ireland's population will increase by 1 million by 2040. So we are doing this against a background of increasing population. In terms of, so we need to provide more services. So if we do nothing, if it's business as usual, we can see just in this example here. Sorry, if people could just mute their microphones there. We can see that the emissions from fossil fuel cars would increase if we do nothing. So what we need to do is to look at the transition points, and we want to shift from our fossil fuel cars to other modes of transport, cleaner modes, walking and cycling, electric cars, public transport, and we want to shift. So as we make these shifts along these transition points, and there's probably about 85 transition points globally in terms of what we can do to get to net zero. We can see the emissions come down as we persuade and work with our communities to change habits, and then we need to develop our sort of infrastructure that will accommodate this. So that's large scale bicycle storage, good cycle routes, ideally separating bikes from traffic, and we build these infrastructure, and we want people to invest in our infrastructure. So we need really good business cases going forward so we can attract investment as well in the areas we want to work, and then we can model where we want to be in terms of our emission targets. And we can, for this example, this is you might be able to see this, but this is personal transport, and we can model where we want to be, walk and cycle, and we can adjust. For example, if we are behind in our cycling infrastructure, we may need to be less ambitious in that sort of transition, and then be more ambitious in getting people onto public transport, and we can adjust those, and everything is interconnected and talks to each other and makes that adjustment accordingly. And of course, we need to monitor it as well. And we need to tell our story. So we need to explain to people what transitions we're making, what it means for them, why we're doing it, and we need the transparency that they can actually log in and see where we are at any moment in time and where we are in terms of our progress. So, and then ideally get to a dashboard that looks like this, that will map our progress, and we can click in and get more details on any of these areas. So that may be sort of what you're working towards. As I said, it's important to begin with the end in mind. Think about now what your climate strategy is going to look like for the end user, for your councillors, for the staff in your organisation. And remember, we're all staff, but we're also citizens. So if we can, convince the staff within our organisation of the reasons we're doing all this, then we have, 200 or 300 messengers going out into the community. So we need to bring them along as well. Okay, so that's sort of beginning with the end in mind. What are we all trying to work towards? So now we're going to start back at sort of the building blocks of why we're going to do it. And Brian is going to come on afterwards and tell us how. So first of all, we need to understand that the communication of any science is difficult. Even, the language, and particularly in terms of climate change is evolving, and the idea of risk and what it means to our communities, we have to sort of tease that out a little bit and localize it. And obviously there are some there's sort of misinformation as well, from some heavy lobby groups, and I'm talking on a global basis, and obviously we still have greenwashing as well. You'll remember Volkswagen a number of years ago with their test results from the exhaust emissions from their cars, and that was a very costly bit of greenwashing, and they paid for that quite substantially. Okay, so let's just acknowledge that we need, when we're talking about climate change, we need to have a sort of a common language. We're a small country. We can do this. If we can standardize our approaches, it'll help everybody, and we'll get there. And one of the things we want to do is to increase this idea of climate literacy within our staff. And again, as I said, they can be messengers going out into the community. So what do we mean by climate literacy? Basic principles of the climate system, access to credible information. Okay, so we're looking at sort of peer-reviewed scientific journals. We're not taking facts and figures off Twitter. We're looking at communicating climate in a meaningful way that actually impacts people, that they understand it, and help us all to make informed and responsible choices going forward. So we really want to promote behavioural change, and that in turn will have an influence on our policy, and we want to end up here really, with just not with our staff, but with our communities as well. So let's, as I said, let's start with the very basics. What is climate change? Well, it's a change of climate which is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, and which is in addition to natural climate variability observed over comparable time periods. So you often get the argument, oh well, the climate is always changing, variable. Yes, but we have seen a marked increase in terms of the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere since the Industrial Revolution, and we'll see some evidence of that. So how do we know climate change is happening? Anyone like to just put a comment in the chat? Brian, maybe you could keep an eye on that. Why do we think, what we're talking about climate change, we're talking about climate action plans. We need to answer the question, why do we think it's happening?
Because of the science, first answer.
Okay.
The data, second answer. Extremes of weather events. Yeah.
Yeah. One more.
Effects on biodiversity.
Brilliant. I think, well, obviously we have a lot of climate strategists out there.
Fires.
Yeah. So we see the effects everywhere. I mean, that's the answer. Ice sheets and glaciers are shrinking. Sea levels are rising. So there's one thing we can see.
And the daffodils are coming out earlier, as just been mentioned.
Yes, and the crocuses. So we are seeing a change. We're seeing longer growing seasons, so that's a very valid point. And there's the flowers earlier, including our daffodils and crocuses. And also animals are actually changing where their elevations in terms of looking for cooler environments. So there's some of the things that we see, and indeed that the daffodils, that's something we see outside our own door. So that's something, and even someone mentioned there, the biodiversity. Now I remember when I was a kid driving back from Dublin to Cavan, and the windscreen would be covered in insects by the time we got home. You do that drive now, and there'll only be a very small amount of insects on your windscreen. So that's just in my lifetime I have seen that change. So things are definitely changing. Okay. So there there is some of the evidence then. So people often think, well, it's just weather stations, and we were throwing thermometers over ships, at the side of ships, in the mid 1800s. But there is a whole consensus of science. So it's not just about weather stations and ships. And there are ice cores, there are tree rings. We can go. They can. Well, we can't. Well, the scientists, they can go back and they can take a glacier, a sample, and they can unlock an air bubble in there, and they can tell what's going on, the concentration in that air. So all this data is coming together to give us an overall consensus that the Earth is getting hotter. And the question, well, is it man-made? And the scientific community, they love to have arguments, but there's no argument about this one. Almost 100% of studies agree that global warming is mainly caused by humans, and that's almost 90,000 studies. And in fact, the remainder of the studies that don't agree tend to be by people who are not generally from climate backgrounds. Okay, so even with our modeling, even there's different organizations. They're coming with different techniques, different modeling software. They're coming up with almost the same curves exactly on their graphs. So we can see that there is a huge consensus that this is man-made. So we are part of the problem. And we can see here that the 10 hottest global years on record have been in the last decade. And in fact, I think 2022 will be another, when the figures come in for this, it will be another record-breaking year. And remember, I think in 2015 there was a senator in the U.S. Senate, and he threw a snowball. He brought in the snowball and threw it in the Senate to prove that global warming was all a con. There will always be cold snaps, and there will always be heat waves, but the ratio now it's 2-to-1. So we're having twice as many heat waves as we are having cold snaps. Okay, so things are definitely warming up. So then it comes to the difference between climate and weather. And as someone once said, weather is your mood and climate is your personality. So a very good way of remembering it then, or getting the message across to people in your organization. So the weather then, that's when you step outside your front door, you're experiencing a meteorological event. Okay, but climate, that's over a longer period. It's measured over a longer period of time. And it's affected by climate systems and our location. Of course, Ireland, situated halfway between the equator and the Arctic, we're in a pretty comfortable latitude, but we still have effects in terms of climate change. We'll get to those in a bit. And then the weather is temperature, air pressure, and moisture, all that instantaneous stuff. And the climate is generally they look for developing climate models. They tend to look at a 30-year period. And the weather, of course, is a few days, a week ahead, when they're assessing what the weather's going to be like. So that's just broadly the difference between climate versus weather, just to make sure when you're speaking to your staff that that's clear. There is a difference, and that's a good summary. And this is a good way of putting it as well. Weather is the wiggle, and climate is the green line. Okay, so as we expect, the weather in winter is worse than the weather in summer, but overall, like I said, over that 30-year time span, we can deduce generally what the climate is like. Okay, so any questions on that? I know the Caro had some great training there for upskilling your staff in terms of this climate science. Have people partaken in that? from their own organizations? You're on mute, Brian.
Mary Darcy has participated, Morgan as well, Kieran Reeves, Paddy Lynch.
Fantastic. So we're seeing that sort of that upskilling that we need.
And Laura adds that it's mandatory for all staff to attend.
There we
Connor
go.
Fallon as well.
Okay, so excellent. Well, we won't complain about that. So the carbon cycle then, carbon, it's all around and within us. It's the fourth most common element in the universe. Most of it is locked away in rocks and underground in deposits of coal, oil, and natural gas. And the rest of it moves through the different spheres, the four spheres, the geosphere, the earth, the hydro, the water, the atmosphere that's above us, the biosphere, the area sort of where living things live. So it doesn't stand still. And here we have the carbon cycle then. So carbon enters the atmosphere as carbon dioxide from respiration and combustion, and carbon dioxide then it's absorbed by producers to make glucose in photosynthesis. And some of you may be looking into sort of biofuels. Well, biofuels are based on sort of the breakdown of that glucose into a fuel, which at the moment, it can be a costly process, but that will be a big thing, and you'll see this for heavier trucks. At the moment, that might be a sort of gateway, the vegetable oil fuels. Then, animals feed on the plant, passing the carbon compounds along the food chain, and most of the carbon they consume is exhaled as carbon dioxide that was formed during aerobic respiration. And of course, the animals and plants, they eventually die and they decompose, break down, and the dead organisms return the carbon in their bodies to the atmosphere and as carbon dioxide by respiration. So in some conditions, the decomposition is blocked. So the plant and animal material is then available as a fossil fuel. So it's sort of locked away. And one of the things about the ability of the Earth to absorb sort of these as a overall heat sink, so the oceans absorb most of that CO2. So we are seeing sort of acidification of the oceans. And I don't know if any of you are keen snorkelers or divers, but certainly you will see in the Great Barrier Reef off the Australian coast you can see a lot of that distress in terms of the bleaching of the coral, and it could also be masking the sort of the seriousness of the situation, in that CO2 being absorbed by the water is not going into the atmosphere, but it's there. So maybe we're doing even worse than expected. So this is a natural cycle. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for our atmosphere, in terms of we're a long way from the sun, so we need these greenhouse gases to keep the planet warm, to keep our water in a liquid state, so we can survive. And but the balance has been thrown off, and this extra CO2 traps the heat and produces global warming. And we can see here a good example, which is a good slide really if you're trying to get the message across again to your staff. So on the left-hand side, we have natural CO2 emissions. So this is the atmosphere, the bath. You may be familiar with this sort of typographic. So here we have our natural carbon cycle. So we have natural sinks, and it's a cycle, it's a process. And then on the right-hand side here, we have human-made CO2 emissions tap. And to halt the warming, we really need to turn off this tap or we do something down here and we try and capture the carbon dioxide if we can. But again, these are sort of untested. It's an uncertain drain. How well it works, we don't know. So what we need to do is reduce our emissions in the first place, and that's just a good visual of seeing the sort of the bathtub filling up. So what does a ton of CO2 look like? Well, unfortunately, you can't see it because it's invisible. So we have to make it visual if we're communicating to staff in a way that they understand. So a ton of CO2 looks, if it was to fill a balloon, it would fill a balloon 10 meters in diameter. And in terms of electricity, that would give us 3,000 kilowatt hours, a 10-meter balloon. So we can start to see the sort of relationship there between the visual and get it into people's heads when we're talking about CO2. It can be an alien concept. This just helps put it in some sort of shape for us. Another one is we all know what's going on in our own homes. So if we can get carbon emissions in terms of what goes on in our own homes, that helps us to sort of get the message in there. So I like to deal in round figures. You know, when you start working sort of decimal places, it puts a scientific veneer on stuff that isn't necessarily scientific. So we like to use big round numbers. So I would say, in general, think of the Irish home. I would say even 20,000 kilowatt hours of energy and emitting 5 tons of CO2. So when someone says to me, "Oh well, we can shave 20 tons of CO2 by doing this particular piece of retrofit," well then I know, okay, well that's equivalent to 4 houses. Okay, so immediately it means something to me. And we have there the energy bill as well, 2,200. I'd say that's taken a bit of a beating over the last number of months. So you will no doubt be paying a bit more than that. And then the EPA did this very good graphic just to give us a visual on how much of CO2 is emitted every day. And we can see the pool bag tower is there. And that's what we have we have to account for, really, which is equivalent to about 62 million tons annually. Yep, and the thing about emissions is, and you will know this from working now with your absolute targets in terms of CO2 emissions from your building portfolios and your transport portfolios for the Gap to Target tool and the monitoring and reporting system. Every ton counts. And we see just in this graphic here that every 5 years, global temperatures are raised by about 0.1 degrees C. And we often get, when we do training, people asking, "Yeah, but you know, Ireland is so small. You know, what we do won't really make a difference, will it? You know, you got China, you got America." The Chinese are emitting a lot less per head of population than we are, for a start. If you were to apply the same logic, none of us would give to charity, because the amount of money we could raise would be so minuscule in terms of the problems that would have no effect. You know, I don't think you get very far if you're explaining to some people that got help from Trócaire or access to fresh water or a new school that the contribution we're making doesn't have an effect. You know, and some people don't eat meat, so you know, on the overall scale of things, one person not eating meat won't make much difference. But you know, it makes them feel good. They're doing something that they have control of. So for them, it's the right thing to do. So just a couple of examples there. You know, when you get that argument, Ireland is so small. Look, we're an island nation. Most of the countries that are most threatened by climate change through rising sea levels are island nations, and we should be presenting a sort of leadership role. And you know, the impact of climate change is felt most in our poorest communities. So along the equator, Southeast Asia, Central America, they're going to feel droughts. They're going to have famine. And the way climate change is going, we can have famine in a number of different places at the same time. So food production worldwide could be affected. And let's face it, Ireland is no stranger to famine, and the sort of the precursor of blight on potatoes is a wet environment. So, you know, we don't have to look too far back to sort of have some empathy with these people. And of course, in the West, we can make ourselves more comfortable when it gets too hot. We can install air conditioning. We can pay the electricity bills. We're in that position. And if you're in some of the poorer communities or regions in the world, you're not able to do that. So we're seeing a growing of sort of discrepancy in terms of ability to cope with climate change between the sort of the rich nations and the poor nations. And of course, it's the poor nations aren't the ones that are causing the problem. I mean, they have very per-headed population, very little emissions. So that's something to bear in mind as well. So let's just then have a look at the global and local impacts. Have any of you done sort of assessment in terms of local impacts in your regions of climate change as part of your studies? Anyone doing river analysis?
Morgan, climate change risk assessments being done by all counties. Mary, Darcy, part of previous CAP.
Okay, so you're sort of looking. I mean, I know that the Met Office has a new unit, and they're trying to model what the effects of climate change will be. And you know, you've like engineering companies like Arup. They need to know, well, if the air is warmer, it absorbs more moisture, so we're going to get more and more rainfall, heavier rainfall. What's that going to mean for drainage on our motorways? Do we need bigger drains? Obviously, there's an expense involved in that. So that is a sort of a new area for planning as well. But there is sort of local impacts, and we just sort of have a look then in terms of the effects of climate change. So one of the things in Ireland, we're very good at saying something is a disaster. You know, everything is a disaster in Ireland, and in some shape or form we might say, but there is actually a standard definition. And you know, those poor people in Turkey and Syria, you know, there is an example of a real disaster, and I believe they've just had another quake. So our thoughts with those communities. So a disaster is when it goes beyond the ability of that community to deal with it. So we can track these disasters once we've our standard definition. And we can see here that the number of weather-related climate and water-related disasters has increased by a factor of 5 over the past 50 years. And the majority of natural disasters are water-related. So when we think water, we sort of think an abundance of water, but we obviously, there's the other side of the coin. There's drought as well. And we can see there the wide range of classifications in terms of climate change and how we look at disasters. So we can see everything from geophysical right over to sort of extraterrestrial, which isn't ET, but things like solar flares, extra radiation in the atmosphere, magnetic pulses, etc. And some of those we are very, very familiar with, you know, landslides, floods, and under biological. We definitely know about epidemics. Okay, so when they map all these events, they call them loss events, is the terminology they use. They can see, if you look at this purple line here, this is the cumulative effect of all these individual loss events here. And we can see how they've been increasing over the last number of years. Okay. So one of the things we know is a direct effect is our heat waves. So that's something, and again, it's something we know about in Ireland. You know, last year we had 30 degrees, 33 degrees in the Phoenix Park. I think that's the second highest national recording. I think correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it was middle of last century in Kildare somewhere. I think they had 30, they just pipped that number there. So, you know, that's the other thing about climate change. It's when we look at it and the models, it's an average. So some places will actually, their climate may improve for the community, and it might get a little bit warmer. But obviously we're not used to sort of temperatures of that scale. And, you know, there'll be a whole new industry of installing air conditioning in domestic homes, no doubt, in the years to come. So it might be a bad area to get into. Other things we're familiar with is floods, and we can see some examples here. And I can't imagine anything worse than your property related than actually your property being flooded. I know is there anyone on from Galway? They're well used to floods in that region. And we can see here's a picture that was taken from the Times there recently. So, you know, for these shop owners, businesses, this is it's becoming a more and more frequent event, and something that we need to sort of, you know, we have to look at our planning in our cities. How do we avoid this? You know, get porosity into our street surfacing so we can pull some of that liquid away from the street, and we can have proper urban drainage schemes. And again, crop failure, and as I said, we're no stranger to famine in Ireland, but changes in climate, drought, it's happening more frequently and in different places at the same time. So it's putting pressure on our food supplies, and of course on the livelihoods of some of these farmers as well. Wildfires, then another symptom of climate change. So their ground is tinderbox, particularly in sort of southern Europe, and a single match will set the whole thing off. Trees are dry, the ground is dry, and if we don't even have to look at, we've seen all these ones in the news, but you know, we have it in Ireland as well. I think examples there from Wicklow and Donegal. And I think the bottom right there is Kerry. So that's something that we're seeing as well. So it's something that we can see happening with increasing frequency. So in terms of Ireland, then, what do the EPA think we're in for? Well, temperature. The number of warm days is expected to increase, and we saw that in the temperatures there from last summer, and indeed in the last decade. And we're going to get more heavy rain in winter and autumn. We expect sea level rises, okay, around our coastal locations, and we are going to get more intense storms across the North Atlantic region. And some things we can't do anything about at the moment. It's too late for this now. So wind speeds have already increased. We're more prone to flooding. Someone again mentioned biodiversity there at the start. the changes in the distribution of plants and animal species, plants flowering earlier, longer growing seasons, and we have pressure on water supply, so we have hose pipe bans. So we're seeing all this stuff. So these are all the messages that hopefully our climate action plans will try and address, and we'll play our part. Okay, so the another element we can look at is climate change and health. And any questions on that previous section there before I move on? Okay, all quiet. Okay, so one of the things we when we're trying to promote climate changes, we need to be able to connect with people. And one of the ways we can do that is by discussing the environment as a healthy environment to live and work and play in. So it's a lever for us to use, and those of you who are on any of the sort of SCI training courses, we look for all the levers we can to try and promote energy efficiency in buildings, because people generally, unless they're from the technical side of your department, they're not that interested in saving kilowatt hours, and they may not be that interested in saving the local authority money either. So we have to look at other angles to try and get them to make a change. So one of the things we do is climate change and health, and we ran a training program with the HSE, and it went down very well, where we were making all these linkages between climate change and health, and the frontline staff, the clinical staff, the people in the operating theatres, it really resonated with them. So it's a good angle to get at, and when you're doing communications, and Brian might touch on that in a bit more detail, try and get an element of that in there. So the first thing we'd say is that climate change, it does impact health. So we've seen the evidence of these. We've seen the floods and drought, the storms, extreme heat, wildfires, the fire and smoke. Obviously, if we go across there, that's going to cause problems with breathing, with allergies, and just thinking of fire and smoke there. A lot of the time, people say, on the sort of the variability of the climate, they say, yeah, well, we always had volcanoes. And the thing about volcanoes is when they erupt, you get a lot of ash and pollutants in the air. So they actually block light. So overall, they have a cooling effect on our climate. Also, they do emit CO2, but when they do the modeling, what they found was that only 1 or 2% of the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere can be tagged back to volcanic eruptions. So it's a bit of a red herring. A lot of people, they say, oh yeah, but the volcanoes, that's all CO2. There's nothing we can do about that. It is a bit of a red herring. And then we see, heat stress. People in our community, some of you may have deep retrofit schemes for your housing stock. So we're trying to, give people dry, warm homes that aren't cold, subject to mold growth. That can have a mental effect, as well as a monetary effect in these people, the fuel poor, trying to keep themselves warm, and then of course injury from some of these floods as well, escaping the floods, etc. So here's a good example of communication. This is from Poland, and basically that says, your car, my lungs. And the EPA, this is a figure from the EPA, they reckon about 1,200 premature deaths in Ireland are due to the quality of the air we breathe. So that's another message to get across. And then, we're all responsible for it. We're driving our cars, we're burning solid fuels, but there are solutions. And part of your climate action plan will be to get people out of their cars and, save that for every kilometre, that 119 grams. If we can get a person to go on a bike for that distance rather than in a car, that's something we can save, and we can model that. Air quality is another one. So we spoke about the longer growing seasons, rising carbon dioxide levels. My wife has asthma, so we're very conscious of the pollen count. So this is something we're directly impacted by. And even the growing season, the farmers will tell you the livestock are out in the fields longer, and they're only taken in, not because traditionally it was because it was getting cold. They're being taken in now in autumn, because the ground is actually just getting too damp underfoot for them. So it's not a temperature thing. So we can see all that. Another example here, the UK here, we have the doctors leading the fight against climate change, and they've all sorts of initiatives. Here's one here in their theatre initiative supporting future sustainable surgical practices. So if we can get our arguments across, the volunteers are there, people are willing. We just need to help them understand why we're doing the different things and why we're asking them to do the various things we've put into our climate action plan. And Brian is a great advocate. When you're selling a message, sell your achievements as well. Your organizations have been working for a long time in this space. So I think you need to sort of take stock and celebrate the achievements your local authorities have made up to now, and then see this sort of climate action planning as a continuation of the good practices you've already implemented. It's not a new thing. It's something you've got credibility in. You've got history and achievement, and delivering the results. And your climate action plan is just building on that very solid foundation you already have. This is. It's hard to believe, isn't it, that unborn babies have pollution in their lungs before they even come into our communities. That is pretty depressing. And, if that doesn't cause you to stop and think a little bit, then I'm not sure if there's much more we can do, really. So lots of sort of research going on in these areas, linking the climate change with sort of health effects. So it's the thing about the environment is it's loads of threads all touching off and interconnecting together. It's very hard to isolate one thing and sort of put it in a box and say, right, we're going to fix this problem here, because everything has a knock-on effect. And even from the health Department of Health have produced this document here. So definitely, if you're working in a sort of as a climate action team, one of the things we recommend is you have a sort of, whether it's an intranet or something on the council's internal systems, but you have a sort of repository for reports and information where you can pull down material that will help you develop your business case and get your message across. And this is definitely one of the documents I'd recommend you put in there, and we can see there how the Department of Health are linking all these things to the environmental effects, first of all, and then the health effects, and then what can be done about them. Okay, so there's some solutions presented in there as well. And that could be something, that could be a line item in your climate action plan, some of those initiatives. Okay. So just we're coming up to 11 o'clock when we'll take a break. This is a pretty good slide in terms of the need to get stuck in now, because it's going to get much more expensive the longer we lead it. And I know some of you are working on, some of you may have been at the public sector conference 2 weeks ago now, is it? And Brian and I were in the government agencies breakout group. We were sort of Brian's the coordinator for that area, and I'm one of the PSMs for the offices in Dublin. And we had someone there from the Department of Defence, and he said, while some people are sort of measuring their plans on a yearly basis, so they have to make, I think, well, it's 8% here, but I think the SEI guidance was 7% year-on-year savings. They have broken that down into monthly savings of 0.6% improvement month on month, and they have tracked that all the way out to 2030. So that is the sort of immediate, short-term, getting stuck in actions that need to be looked at. Obviously, we need to do our medium-term and our longer-term planning as well. And the other advice from that colonel was, don't focus on 2030, focus on 2050, and that will give you the comfort that you've got the longer stuff in there in your plans. So you're going for net zero. You're not going for 50%. Your organization is going for that net zero target all the time. Okay. Yeah. So yeah. So if the why is powerful enough, the how is easier. Look, it doesn't get easy. It's not an easy job you're being asked to do, to develop your climate action plans, to implement your climate action plans, to get finance for your climate action plans. And that's another thing. As climate officers, you need to go for a coffee with someone from the finance department in your organization and work together. And that's the reason, one of those, whatever platform you're choosing to develop your climate action plans, there should be a financial investment element to it. And like I said, it's all in the one place. So if the why is powerful enough, the how is easier. So we'll just conclude this first module with this, if I can get it to play. Okay.
I hear people say your future is bright, but after this past year, I wonder if that's still true. When I see the news, sometimes I'm overwhelmed. What's going to happen to my family, to our planet, to the animals, to my friends, to me?
Make no mistake, we are in the midst of the fight for our lives, for our planet, our people, and our shared future. Around the world, we are grappling with an unprecedented pandemic, confronting fires on our hillsides, floods in our streets, and entrenched systemic inequality. A global crisis of this magnitude, one that transcends borders, politics, and ideology, requires nothing less than bold, united, global action to meet the urgency of this moment.
Mayors of the world's greatest cities know that our communities and residents are already feeling the effects of the climate emergency firsthand. They know we cannot wait this crisis out, so instead, they have raised their ambition by committing to cut their city's fair share of emissions in half by 2030 and are already taking bold steps to make this happen.
Mayors are delivering on a shared vision for a green and just recovery from the COVID pandemic that puts equity and inclusivity at the heart of our decision-making, prioritizes investing in crucial public services, creating good green jobs, supporting essential workers, ensuring access to healthy and sustainable food, and giving public spaces back to people and nature. Mayors know that cities can't do this alone, which is why they are working collaboratively with young people, labor leaders, heads of state, businesses, investors, and citizens.
If we all work together, we are not only capable of leading us out of the climate crisis, we will build a world where everyone is included and everyone is safe, where we can look our kids in the eye and tell them that their future is indeed bright. The actions we take this decade, starting today, will determine the future of humanity and all life on our planet. Together,
We can.
We must.
change the trajectory our planet is on. Join us.
Okay, so just a useful summary there of the actions we can take and sort of the immediateness of what we need to do. Any questions on that? No? Okay, well then I suggest we take a break so we can walk the dog if you're working from home, empty the dishwasher, whatever it is you need to do. And we will see you back at 11:20. So 11:20, and we'll be back with Brian then. Okay, we'll see you in a few minutes. Okay, Brian, I think we'll finish off the next. We'll start with the next session. People come back.
Okay, Noel, thanks. Can you see the slide?
Yep.
Okay, well, this is the second part of the morning, really, and I'm going to outline to you now basically a simple communications framework which you can apply in terms of communicating your climate action plans. And I'm sure some of you will already be familiar with this sort of process, basically, but it's essentially this plan, do, check, act approach, which I'm sure you've all used in different areas in your work in other aspects of what you're trying to achieve. So it basically starts with having commitment, having leadership from the top of the organization, identifying your current situation in terms of what you want to do, planning and implementing, and then reviewing and trying to maintain the momentum. So in terms of communicating your climate action plans, if it was just a process of sending out an email to all staff in the local authority with a link to the climate action plan, then that's our job done. But I'm sure that's not what you're planning to do. And we need to look at it in more detail. We need to look at what we need to do. How do we get the commitment? We need to use senior management as well. We need to identify certain aspects of what we're trying to achieve in relation to our current situation and planning and implementing and going through that process. And this sort of simple plan, do, check, act approach was developed by Deming back in the, I think it was the 70s, 80s or whatever. And what he said was, if you can't identify what you're doing in terms of a process, then you don't know what you're doing. So this is a simple process of essentially internal communications, basically, within your organization and communicating your climate action plans and what you want to do to all staff within the organization. So we're just talking about internal communication here. And as Orla said, the external aspects will be covered at a future on a future workshop further down the line. So what we're talking about here is communicating your climate action plan internally to staff within your organization. And I just want you to, as we go through this process, we're going to finish up at 12:30, I think. Is that right, Orla?
Yes, yeah, that's good, Brian.
Yep, 12:30. I just want you to note down two basic sort of approaches, examples, principles, or whatever that from this presentation that could be applied in your own job of communicating your climate action plans to staff within your local authority. So just make a note of two actions, measures, principles, or whatever that you could use in communicating the plans, and we'll ask you to identify those at the end. So in terms of communicating our plans, it's a question of getting people on board really internally within our organizations. And to do that, we need certain support. So what would you say is the number one reason why internal programs fail within organizations in general? Any suggestions on that? I'll just bring up a slide here from Slido. So if you can grab your mobile phones, this is a word count basically, and either capture the code there, the QR code, or join on your internet on your computer at that number there. So at slido.com. So the number one reason why internal programs might fail within organizations. If you can't use the Slido, then just put it into the chat. First one, poor communication. Yes, that's a good one. No engagement of staff. Yes, definitely. That's what we want to achieve at the end of the day. Anything else? Anything in the chat? Lack of buy-in from staff. Definitely yes. Momentum is lost. That's a classic one, yes, as we go through the process. Another classic one, not time realistic. Yeah, definitely, yes. We all need more resources. We all need more time, really. Okay, anything in the chat? No, nothing. Okay, well, you can see there's a number of reasons why you think programs might fail, ownership. Okay, well, the one that we're talking about here really is, and somebody has mentioned it there, the lack of senior management support. And if we don't have that senior management support, then our program is not going to be a long-term success. So we need the full backing of senior management. We need the leadership of senior management in order to be able to get our message across on climate action within our own organisation, within your own local authorities. And Meath County Council, a few years ago, they ran a survey for staff, and this was on energy. And one of the questions they asked was in relation to the attitude of staff. And they asked them, do you think it's the duty of senior management to promote and take responsibility for energy efficiency? What do you think the response was? Well, basically, 93% of the staff in Meath County Council a few years ago now said it was the duty of senior management to do that, to promote and take responsibility for energy efficiency. Maybe the 7% who said it wasn't their duty were the actual senior management. I'm not sure about that. But as you can see there, if the senior management was not on board with their energy management program, then, you know, in the long term, staff are not going to be on board either. So we need that vital aspect of leadership and commitment from senior management. So what does that look like really? Well, some examples. If some senior management isn't on board, isn't committed, then nobody else is going to be in the long term. So what does it look like? Well, this is just one simple example here from Cavan County Council, Tommy Ryan, and he was the face of their energy management and energy efficiency program, basically exhorting people to be more energy efficient in the workplace. So we need that sort of management. We need management to be seen to be committed to energy, to climate, to environmental, to sustainability. We need that crucial backing from the manager. They need to do the talking. The leaders, the managers within our organisations, within the local authorities need to do the talking. Ideally, that should be face to face, you know, to show that people it's an important issue, and you know, it's not just sort of another thing that we're asking people to do. If we're serious about climate action within our own organisations, then we have to do this. Otherwise, we're not going to achieve it. We're not going to achieve the targets of the 51% reduction of greenhouse gases by 2030 and the net zero by 2050. We're not going to achieve those targets if we don't have the senior management on board and backing and leading. Okay, it's not an easy job, I know that, but you know, if it isn't in place, then we're not going to achieve our targets. But it's not just the senior managers, it's also the middle managers. And study after study after study tells us that the people at the middle level, at the sort of unit heads, section heads, department heads, the employees who work hardest to achieve the environmental goals of the organisation are also the ones who believe it matters to their immediate boss. So we've seen the results of the investigations into this area, and it keeps coming back that these intermediate people, the line managers essentially, are a critical link in the process as well. So they need to be on board as well. So again, that's an even more difficult job. If we have the senior management, but we need to get the senior managers to push these people in the middle levels and get them on board. And as I say, the studies have shown us that basically the leaders and the line managers account for about 2/3 of the impact on employees' attitudes and behaviour. So that's 2/3, 66% basically, or more, impact on employees' attitudes and behaviour. And the sort of the formal channels, the sort of internal communications that we use traditionally and the campaigns that we run that were directly targeting staff account for just up to maybe maximum 10% of the impact. But that's where we spend a lot of the time and money, is on these sort of general campaigns. So if we just had senior and middle management on board, they are the single most important factor in delivering any internal communication strategy. It must be senior and line manager participation. And in order to run an effective campaign that's going to have impact, we need these crucial players on board, the senior managers and the line managers. And one organization actually used that approach in their energy management program, getting people basically to save energy. They just concentrated on the middle management and delivered training to them, let them know how to get staff on board with energy. And before the project, they measured what the situation was. 10% of the workforce took action on energy savings. And after the program, after the project, 85% took action on energy savings. So a massive. What do you think that the payback on that program was? How many years? How many months? How many weeks? I don't know. Well, I do know it was a 3-week payback. So you can't really argue with those figures, and you can't argue with that approach. Again, it's not easy, I know that, but if we want a highly successful program, a highly successful campaign, then we really need to get these people on board. So that's really, we need that commitment. We need that leadership at the senior management level and the middle management level. And the second step in the process of communicating our climate action plans is to identify our current situation in certain areas. And the first thing that we need to identify really is, what is our objective in terms of communicating our climate action plan internally within the organization? Is it, to promote it to all staff? Okay, that's the basic thing. That's what we do. We send out the email, whatever we say, this is our climate action plan. That's, falling off a log, really, So is it leading by example? If we're asking, in our local authority areas, if we're asking other groups, businesses, community groups or whatever to tackle climate change, then we should be leading by example ourselves. The local authorities should be implementing their own messages within their own facilities and sites and buildings, etc. Is it basically to get buy-in from all staff, for example? So I just want you to think about that for a second. And what would you say is the main objective that you're trying to achieve in communicating your climate action plan within your organization to employees, to other staff? What is the main objective? And just let us know over the mic or write it in the chat. So just put down, what is the main objective that you're trying to achieve in communicating your climate action plan to employees within the local authority? Just identify one single main objective.
Ian Jackson there, Brian, buy-in, Paddy Lynch, that we're all in this together.
Yeah. Any more?
Pete Murta, shared responsibility. So that's a good one.
Okay, so yeah, shared responsibility, buy-in, get everybody involved. Ideally, that's what we want to achieve. So how are we going to do that? Well, in order to achieve the targets, and Noel mentioned this right from the outset, that it's a big challenge, really. And in order to do this, we really need to say that every job is a climate job. So that is getting everybody involved in the process, and that is about ownership of the issue by everybody within the organization, that buy-in essentially to get everybody on board. So that is really our main objectives, as you've already mentioned there, a number of you in the chat already.
A couple more there, Brian. Mary, benefits on a personal and economic level, and mobilize action. So the objective is actually to get them to do something.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, very excellent responses there. So and one organization, and is increasingly sort of going that way, used this sort of principle really a number of years ago, and that was Unilever in Australia, and their sustainability program. One of the things they did was they gave a business card to everybody within the organization saying that you were the head of sustainability in your particular area. So that in order to emphasize that it's everybody's job. So every job is a climate job, unfortunately now, and that's the way we have to go. And a lot of these sort of, you might see in these sort of large companies, multinationals or whatever, or not even multinationals, they had environmental departments, sustainability unit or whatever, and some of them actually got rid of their sustainability unit. And the reason why they did that was didn't want sustainability just to be the responsibility of a group of people in one department or one unit. They wanted it to be the job of everybody. And that's really what we need to do if we are going to achieve our climate targets of 51% greenhouse gas emissions reductions by 2030 and net zero by 2050. So another thing that we need to identify in this identify stage is our stakeholders, the other individuals or groups within our organization, or including those externally as well, who can exert a positive or negative influence on our program, basically to promote our climate action within our local authorities. And one way of presenting that really, and maybe for me, I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with this approach, this stakeholder analysis approach. Some of the sort of key areas that might be relevant are, obviously health and safety, human resources, but again, the middle managers here, this sort of hierarchy as well, are critically important. And one way of looking at it is this stakeholder map. And dividing these key influencers. They could be a negative influence, don't forget as well, in terms of the level of influence they have on us getting our climate message across within the local authority, and the level of interest they might have in this program of climate action within the local authority. So we can categorize our stakeholders, or we can identify the stakeholders according to this grid of the influence and interest, and low and high in each one. So looking at the different ones, okay, low influence, low interest, minimal effort there, keep them informed but don't invest too much time. These are sort of sleepers, if you like. High influence, low interest. They have a high influence on what we're trying to achieve. They're not interested. I'm not interested in your program. I'm not interested in climate action. I've other things to do. I've got to get on with the work in my own department. So they are the danger, basically. They are the potential blockers, and are going to maybe prevent you doing what you want to do. So they're the most difficult to engage. Try to take their needs into account, try to increase their interest in one way or another, keep them informed. But ultimately, we need the senior managers, basically. A lot of these really may be at the sort of level, the middle manager level. So we may need the senior management support there to get them on board. So the potential blockers, the sort of preachers, if you like, they have a high interest in our program, don't have a great influence, if you like. These could be maybe external influences like trade unions, I don't know, local media, whatever, local community groups, whatever it is. They may be interested in what we're doing, but they're not going to be able to influence directly internally in our own organization. So the key players obviously are the ones with the high interest and high influence, the champions for our programs, and hopefully the sort of senior managers are in there as well. But in terms of this level here, the potential blockers, we need to try to push them basically a bit more to the right and try to increase their interest. And as I say, we need senior management to help us on that. So again, it's critically important to have senior managers on board. And these might be some of the stakeholders involved in the local authority areas, the CEO, the elected representatives, the EPO, the directors of services, obviously the line managers, supervisors, etc. Finance, critically important, as Noel mentioned already. So I just want you to have a look at that grid there for a second and try to identify one group or individuals within your local authority or unit or whatever it is who might have a high influence in what you're trying to achieve, but has a low interest. So if you can maybe put that in the chat, a group or individual or unit or whatever within your local authority who has a high influence in what you're trying to achieve, but isn't that interested. Just put it in the chat if you can, please. Yeah, finance department, definitely. We've heard that one already. The EPO, extreme top right, exactly, that should be. Councillors, okay, some of them, yeah, can be brought on board maybe, but it is a group, could be a problem. Heads of finance, again, finance is coming through there as a particular problem area. Okay, so as we can see there, we may need the senior managers to influence these people, like the finance, for example, and get them more on board. So another one here, I want you to identify currently in your local authority, a group or individual or unit which has a high influence and a high interest in the program. It's not your program, it's the local authority's program. Climate Action Team, the CARO CEO, excellent, yeah. Some councillors, yeah, that was counterpoint to the previous one, really. Climate First Committee, Climate Coordinator, SPCs. Okay, yeah, exactly. So, if you have these people on board, obviously, particularly the CEO, then that's going to be a boost to our effort, really, and getting everybody on board. So as we can see there, it's a good way of identifying who you need to involve maybe in the program in one way or another, and also who you need to get support from. The bottom right there, basically, the high interest potentially, but low influence. Maybe we're looking possibly at like local media there, for example, but also, for example, here, local authorities are already working with sort of community groups or sporting groups. In this case, the GEA and local authorities have been working together on the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. So there's no reason why you can maybe get involved with local community groups as well, if possible, the local media, and then use that to influence people internally within the organization as well. So that's just another simple example of who ideally we could get on board to help us do our job, essentially. The other thing that we need to identify in this identify stage is our target market, target audience. And as I said, this really has to be the line managers and the leaders, basically, because as I said, they account for 2/3 of the impact on people's attitudes and behavior. So they really should be the primary target audience if we're trying to implement the plan. And staff, obviously, in general, different staff, different locations or whatever, different functions. So maybe you're going to be saying different things to different people, different things to the admin people, different things to the line managers, the supervisors, technical staff. They may be out in the field or whatever, operators, so they would have a different sort of role to play. The maintenance people for the buildings, etc. I don't know if you have much catering staff, for example, not cleaners or whatever coming in to clean things. So there's a range of sort of different staff there that, you know, we're probably going to be delivering different messages to those in terms of what we're trying to achieve on climate action within the local authority. So again, we need to identify who those different groups of staff are those different target audiences that we need to target. So identify the stakeholders, the target audiences. I'm not going to go through this in great detail because there isn't time really. We need to look maybe at the views and the awareness of people, the knowledge. We've seen the example from Meath County Council area. Are there any barriers, you know, that are preventing us from doing our job in that area? What are the current communication routes that are already in place within the local authority? What are the good practices that are going on, but also the bad practices that we want to change, the behaviours, for example, and do people have control over energy use, for example, and resource use in general, for which we want them to take action. So there are some of the other areas that we would like to identify: the barriers, the knowledge, the attitudes. You know, is it easy for people to do things? Do they have control? You know, is it a question of habit, convenience, or the existing procedures? So we need to change those. Is there anything wrong with the physical sort of environment, the facilities, the surroundings that we need to change? And, you know, are people taking in electric heaters, or is it just a question of sort of forgetfulness and apathy? So they may be some of the barriers that we might be looking at. So what I'm saying here really is, don't assume that you know all the answers, or that you know why people are behaving in a certain way. Rather, you know, try to assess the situation in a bit more detail by talking to people, carrying out surveys or whatever it is, and interviews, or going around on walk rounds and that sort of thing. I'm sure you're doing a lot of all of this already, but it's, you know, a question of keeping the effort going anyway. So that's the identify stage. Those are some of the things that we would need to identify in relation to energy management, for example. And then the next stage in the process is basically the planning stage, and that really, I'm going to really take that in conjunction with implement, because they're sort of very closely linked together anyway. So planning and implementing your internal or program of communicating climate action within the organization. And this, you know, in terms of planning, basically, what are our objectives? We've asked that already. Getting buy-in from staff, for example. Should we carry out a survey at the beginning of the process to identify, you know, the level of commitment maybe that people have to these issues, climate action within the local authority, and then maybe 6 months down the line carry out another survey and, you know, attach a particular goal to that process, for example, in terms of measuring the sort of level of commitment that people might have to the overall sort of process. Developing key messages and branding, maybe if that's appropriate. Setting your basic strategy, identifying any resources that you might need, whether in time, that has been mentioned already as a problem. Finance, maybe, I don't know, whatever you need to do. What sort of media, tools and techniques are you going to use? Develop a simple action plan and maybe pilot your plan in a particular area or building or whatever it is within the local authority to test it out, and then refine it over the period as you roll out your plan overall throughout the local authority. But one of the sort of first things that is very useful to do, we've got our, you know, let's say we've got our climate action plan already. It's, you know, maybe a 30, 40, 50 page document, but nobody's going to read all that, obviously. So can we sort of summarize it in any simple way to get that message across? And I know a lot of you are doing this already in terms of getting the message across on climate action within the local authority. But a few years ago, and this was, you know, one of the first sort of examples that I had seen of this, you know, many years ago, really. And it was actually the city of Seattle and their climate action plan was 171 pages. So they condensed it down into a 2-page infographic, basically. And they use that to get the message across on climate action. So if we can do that as well in terms of letting people know what we need to do and what the overall process is, then ideally people will be more interested in coming on board. And, you know, if we can make it something attractive that people might want to put on their walls, even better. So what they did was, obviously they had their overall goal, 30% reduction. This is a few years ago. They equated that to the number of barrels of oil and the amount of savings to be made. How are they going to do it? At home, getting around, eating, buying stuff. This was the city in general, really. So not just workplaces. You know, where did the greenhouse gas emissions come from? They're not just the car, not just transport. What's the sources of greenhouse gas emissions? And, you know, what do we need to do? What are the simple actions that we need to do in terms of implementing our plan on climate action? And as I say, a lot of local authorities are already using this type of approach really to get the message across on climate action. And you can see this here basically from Westmeath County Council. They have this simple infographic on their sort of overall strategic approach, if you like, to climate action within the county. So if we can apply that approach really to the workplace as well, you know, what are we trying to achieve in the workplace, and present it as an overall plan within the county council that we want everybody to come on board, and letting them know what to do as well. So that relates to setting objectives and getting the message across. Developing our key messages is the next step in the process, and any branding that we might want to do. And we've heard a lot of, you know, there has been a lot of bad news stories basically on energy and climate change in the last few years, and the media is particularly to blame for a lot of this, really, in general. And you know, the problem is really that, you know, we can't dwell on this negative imaging. So over the long term, doom and gloom isn't going to work. Okay, we can identify what the problems are in our own areas and globally as well, as Noel has pointed out. We need to do that. We need to identify what the problems are, but we then need to move on to identifying the solutions, because doom and gloom is not going to work over the long term. So we need to identify, but then quickly move on to the solutions. And the sort of approaches that we need to avoid really is this sort of, if you want to call it, it's a new word, I think, catastrophizing. We can't just talk about catastrophes all the time. We don't want to be moralizing to people either. We don't want to make it a sort of a general thing. We want to make it as local as possible. And you've identified already some of the things that you're doing in terms of the local impacts of climate change, or the sources of the impacts that are happening there in your own local authorities. And the last one there is statistizing, another American term, which means that, you know, we don't want to be talking about statistics all the time. We want to try to make it as personal and as local as possible in terms of, you know, telling people what we're doing, how we're addressing this. So what we need to do basically in terms of getting the climate message across is this classic one, that sell the sizzle, not the sausage. And that's sort of terminology came from a report a number of years ago by one of the foremost environmental consultancies in the UK, Uterra, and their report was sell the sizzle, not the sausage, in terms of getting the message across on climate change. So what we need to be saying is the sort of positive outcomes, the solutions of climate action. You know, the use of natural daylight in our offices, if possible, if we can do that, as you can see from this example here. The sort of net zero, the low carbon, the carbon reduction, basically cutting pollution from energy and transport as well. So all these positive outcomes from climate action that we are achieving and that we need to implement more within our own societies and within our own organizations and local communities as well. So we need to sell the benefits of sustainable actions and the solutions as well. You know, like this example here from the N24 in Clonmel, the sustainable urban drainage system that they had put in there along the N24. I don't know if you've seen that, Orla, on the N24 in Clonmel. So it's basically a vegetated filter strip, and it also provides biodiversity and aesthetic benefits for the road as well. So, and it's basically a nature-based solution for our climate action problem. So these are the sort of positive things, the positive outcomes, the biodiversity, the aesthetics, or whatever it is, that the things that a lot of you are doing already. We need to promote these in terms of what we are achieving. But when we're talking about climate action, you know, we need to drop the jargon, basically. And one study that was carried out recently, well, this was in the US actually, on common scientific terminology, they found that some of this sort of terminology actually confuses people. So if you can look at, if you look at this graph here, the different terms that are used in terms of getting the message across on climate action, on the right are the terms that people easily understand. On the left, they don't understand at all. So what they don't understand is, for example, mitigation. They don't understand climate neutral. This may be different for Ireland. This is US findings, but the principle is the same. There will be terms that people just don't understand. They can't get their head around. So we want to avoid the use of that sort of jargon. We need to make sure that people understand what we're saying, basically. So adaptation, something that people can understand. Carbon dioxide removal, we've been hearing about carbon dioxide for a long time now, so people are a bit more familiar with that, abrupt change, those sort of things. So as as we're communicating our message, just bear in mind, obviously, some of these this terminology people may not really understand. So we need to avoid the jargon and try to present it in terms of terminology that people can understand. And traditionally, the problem with getting the message across on climate change has been these sort of things. This is less now. It's probably, I think people are a bit more understanding of what is happening. So what, traditionally has been the problem with, climate change is something that's happening at some point in the future, not now. Well, I think it's here with us now. I think more and more people are coming to grips with that. It's happening somewhere else. It's happening out in Bangladesh or, somewhere in Africa. It's not happening in Ireland. Again, the effects of climate change are happening in Ireland. It's happening to somebody else, some other social groups, it doesn't affect me. I'm able to sort of turn on my air conditioning or whatever it is, and the heat wave and this sort of thing. So, that's not my problem. I haven't seen it. It's not happening here. So the sort of experiential sort of thing. So these are some of the problems that has been traditionally the problem with getting the message across on climate change. But as I say, that's sort of easing now. And what we need to do really is to keep the message simple, avoid jargon, try and frame the message in sort of terms that people, common day terms that people would understand. And Noel has mentioned some of that already, but I'll be coming to that a bit more shortly. Framing your message basically with other issues, make it as local as possible if you can, and be honest basically. So we don't want to sort of try to pull the wall over anybody's eyes. So just have a look at a few statements here and see if you can identify which of the following statements is most effective. The one on the left or the one on the right? The one on the left focuses on uncertainty. Although we can never be 100% certain of anything, it is likely that changes in our climate are due to human influence. The one on the right scientists are as certain about the link between human behavior and climate change as they are about the link between smoking and lung cancer. So which of those statements do you think people would understand more easily and be more sort of motivated by, if you like? If you could put it in the chat again, A or B? B, 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 B. Yes, yes, all Bs. So yes, definitely B is the one there. So basically we're changing it from the sort of the message of uncertainty. We're not really 100% certain, the sort of thing, but it's highly likely, whereas we're turning it around. We're saying it's as certain as the link between smoking and lung cancer. So again, a very powerful message there, in terms of getting the message across on climate change. This one here, although there's a great deal unknown about the local services affected and the climate change is likely to cause more flooding in the future, as against the risk of our town flooding disrupting our businesses and schools is now higher than ever before because of climate change. Again, which of those is most effective? If you could put it in the in the chat. Right. Okay. D, yeah, is definitely the one. So we're changing it from a question of uncertainty. We're not too sure, it's unknown, it's likely to cause more flooding or whatever, to one of risk. So we know that there is a risk. The risk is increasing and the risk is bigger, and it's getting bigger every year, really. So turning it around from uncertainty to risk, is another critical way of getting the message across. Also, we can use terms like climate crisis, climate emergency, climate threats, rather than climate change, which is a bit sort of watery, if you like, in a way, maybe. But we also need to try to, as I say, frame the message in terms that people will understand. And as I said, Noel has mentioned some of this already. And if you want to have a look at one example of this, this is a very good example here on the YouTube. It's from one of the sort of foremost climate communicators, climate science communicators in the US, and she's a very effective communicator. She gets the message across really well. So have a look at that video, and there is another series of videos that she has produced which are very useful in terms of getting the message across on climate change. So as I say, highly recommended to have a look at that video. And another example here really is sort of framing it in terms of the war against climate change as opposed to the sort of the race against climate change. And this study was carried out recently again in the US. They interviewed, they presented a scenario to 3,000 people, and in one group they presented it as a war on climate change, and in the other group they presented it as a race against climate change. And the terminology or the message that had the biggest impact was the one of presenting it as a war against climate change, and similarly the sort of combating climate change rather than sort of going after or addressing climate change. We want to sort of try to make it more definite, if you like. And health health is another way of presenting the message, of framing the impact of climate change in terms of the impact it has on our health. And you can see here some examples. Noel has mentioned this already: allergies, heart health, pollution, heat waves, etc. That's happening in Ireland even as well. Asthma, another big one there as well. And if you are familiar with Arnold Schwarzenegger, he has now become a major climate activist, and this is one of his main arguments that he uses for getting the climate action across. So, even the Terminator is actually on board with this message there, and one of the ways he it gets the message across is relating it to people's health in that case. So how do we get the message across? Well, really, there's a sort of an infinite way of doing it: newsletter, email, internet, whatever it is, storytelling, poster, stickers, etc., social media, and that sort of thing. So, and I'm not going to go through those in any great detail, but maybe just to highlight some of them. And Meath County Council, they actually carried out a series of climate action roadshows. So I think this sort of, the climate theme does sort of fit into, or is very useful for, this is a very useful way of getting the climate action message across, the sort of roadshow, if you like, that could maybe go around different buildings or different sites within your local authorities, or in our sites within the county even as well, and getting the message across in the sort of classic roadshow as well. So that can be a very effective way of getting the message across. Another way really is basically finding out what the people are doing, your staff, local people in the local area, whatever it is. They really tell the best story, the employees, the staff that are working in your own local authority. And one example of a company a few years ago on their energy management program, they got one of their staff, one of the employees was building a low energy house, and they got them to give a sort of presentation every month at the staff meeting on how they were getting on with building their energy efficient house. So, getting people, if you can identify what people are doing, if they've got a grant for implementing a sort of energy heat pumps or whatever it is, or upgrading the insulation in their house or whatever it is, then that's a good way of getting the message across. Find out about that. Promote it internally within the local authority to other staff. People are interested in hearing what other people are doing or what they've done. So, and it's a good way of getting the communication going, the word of mouth as well, and people are interested in knowing what other people have done. And this one here, example as well, from the Digital Hub Development Agency in Dublin, and they implemented in their own offices there in the sort of outside area, this sort of pocket forests, as they call them. And there is an organization that actually does this for anybody, for community groups, for businesses, or local authorities even, or whatever it is, or non-government organizations. And they plant these sort of small areas of sort of local indigenous varieties of trees or whatever, small trees or shrubs or whatever it is, in this particular area within the staff site and workplace. And it's a very effective way of getting the message across, particularly on biodiversity there, and it gets people talking and interested in the area. So as I say, pocket forests, they installed this pocket forest basically in the Digital Hub, and they've done that in a lot of organizations throughout the country as well. And the staff, but it also could be, the children of staff as well. And I think that there's somebody here from Meath County Council on the line at the moment. And a few years ago, what they did was they got the children of staff to come in to one particular building in Meath County Council, and they got them to collect all the paper waste that was thrown out by the employees, by the staff in that particular building or floor. I'm not sure which it was. And they collected all this waste material, and they developed these sort of images of elephants basically, and they put them on display in the foyer area, and the entrance, the reception area of the building. And this basically, the paper waste in this building was the sort of elephant in the room that everybody really should take notice of. And they did, as a result, get people to think about paper waste within their own buildings by getting the children of staff involved in doing this sort of artwork on the waste generated. So again, a very useful example of how organizations, local authorities have used staff or even their children to actually get the message across. And that's another message as well. What we're talking about is future generations, really, the impact that climate action is having on future generations as well. If we're talking about branding, or if we're talking get the message across, then we should use the right inviter. And in this case, it was the future generations, if you like. And we may want to brand our program in one way or another. That's up to you. And this is an example from the Marine Institute. And then they had this different branding for the different the program on energy that they ran over a period of number of years, which is still going actually. So what we then need to do is set our strategy, and that's basically to develop the tools in order to match the behaviors, the barriers, and the target audiences that we want to address. So that's just one simple way of applying strategy. And as I say, I'm not going to go into any great detail, but we need to identify the resources and also select promotional media and tools and techniques. The resources, I'll leave that to yourself. You know what to do there. But in terms of the media and the tools and the techniques, for trying to get people to do something, this is another very useful approach to use, and it's called the 4 E's. Originally, we've added a further E, which is energize. They are enable, engage, exemplify, and encourage. And this is based on studies by the Department of Environment in the UK a number of years ago, where they looked at several hundred public campaigns and workplace campaigns on environmental and energy issues. And what they found was that of all the measures that were implemented in all these several hundred campaigns, they could be categorized into these 4 simple categories: enable, engage, exemplify, and encourage. And then we've added energize basically to try to make it a bit fun. So when we're talking about enabling, we're talking about removing barriers, providing facilities, giving people information, providing capacity, maybe trying to devolve budgets if that's possible, reporting structures, maybe procedures, providing capacity to middle management, for example, to deliver and cascade the message as well, educating people, training people, in this case, giving information. I'm not going to go through that one there. Training, for example, is another one that we can use. And as you mentioned, you're already doing that. So that can be very effective. So in terms of enabling people, these are the sort of things that we need to do. And the second E really is engaging people in one way or another through pledges, involving them in the solution, try to get them to come up with their own solutions, really, maybe through competitions, through personalizing the process in one way or another, the media that we use, maybe through things like seasons and events at different times of the year. I know it's difficult to keep the message going basically, but you can see here at different times of the year we can apply different sort of awareness days, and these are on energy, but there are others like on biodiversity that they did there in Carberry a few years ago as well, down in Cork. So there are different themes that are happening throughout the year, different environmental days, European days, world days, or whatever it is, national days. So we can use those to keep the message going as well. And they're on Energy Link, I think. Also, maybe again using the health message, Healthy Ireland, they run a series of workshops that we can use maybe, and Sligo, they use that basically to relate sort of workplace health with our own personal health. So that was very effective as well. And then the third E really is exemplifying, leading by example and reinforcing good practice. And what we can ask the question, what's the most cost-effective way of communicating your message? And, looking back at the classic one that I've been repeating all the time, leaders and line managers, they account for 2/3 of the impact on people's attitudes and behaviors in the workplace. So if we can use those people, those leaders, those line managers to get the message across, it's not easy, I know, but if we can do it, then it's probably the most cost-effective way of communicating our message. And then it's not just left to us, it's left to other people as well. We can get them on board. Another one, as Noel has mentioned already, what is your organization doing already? And I know a lot of you are doing things, we've seen this in your reports, and on the websites and different places. So what we need to do is to promote that to staff. Basically, the organization that's putting its money where its mouth is, we're already investing all this amount of money on energy management, on resource efficiency, or whatever it was. You hear the classic argument, oh, well, they just want us to do this to save the organization money. I'm not interested. So the organization is spending hundreds of thousands of euros or millions maybe in some areas on energy management programs, and they're just doing that to save the organization money. Well, no, I don't think that is the answer. That's not why they're doing it. Well, they're obviously going to be more efficient, but they're also doing it basically to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And you're doing this already. Roscommon, County Council, Galway, Tipperary, Mayo, Donegal, Cork, etc. So a lot of these things are happening already. And again, it's one of the most cost-effective ways, cheapest things that you can do. Promote what you're doing already. You know all about it, what you're doing already. So promote that to staff in terms of what you've already achieved. And just here's one simple example from, well, this is actually a local authority in the US, I think it is, and just some of the areas that what they've done: transit, transport, energy efficiency and green buildings, forests, farms, clean energy future, waste and recycling. So those 5 areas that are already doing things on energy, environmental issues and sustainability and climate action, and then what they want people to do in return as well. Another sort of simple example here, the health group in Newcastle in the UK there, they send out these emails on a regular basis on what they've done in terms of sustainability within their hospitals. 48% of non-clinical waste recycled in 2017. So a series of emails that they sent out on a regular basis on what they've achieved. And this man here, basically, he said, setting an example is not the main means of influencing people. It's the only means. So if we can demonstrate what we're doing already, then we're going to be able to influence people in one way or another. They're going to be a bit more inclined to come on board and play their part if they see that the local authority is doing a lot in this area already, and encouraging people through prompts, recognition, rewards, social pressure, social norms, feedback, etc. The posters, the stickers, the on the bins or whatever it is, these sort of things, the prompts, basically these work, when people are reasonably well motivated and are able, it's fairly easy to do. So triggers and prompts work in this area basically here, but they're only one sort of part of the solution. Social proofs, social norms. People are more likely to do something if they know that others are doing it or others approve of it. And we often try to encourage people to do something by presenting the problem as something that is regrettably frequent. We say that most people don't switch off their computers in the office. So what's that saying to people? It's saying that most people don't switch them off, so I'm not going to switch them off either. So that's really the wrong message. So when we get a program going, we have maybe a result after a week or a month or whatever it is, and we find that there's been an increase in the number of people who switched off their computer, then this is a more powerful message. There was a 60% increase in the number of people who switched off the computer last week in this building. And again, the Marine Institute, they used this sort of messaging as well in their campaign. And said Team 7 in this particular area, they reduced their energy spend by 16%, and they've also inspired others to do the same. So well done, great work, keep up the effort. So they're the sort of messages, if we can get them, that we need to get across to people. So we need to try to identify where progress is being made and try to promote that. We need to tell stories about what's happening on sustainability, either internally within our own local authorities or locally in the local community, in the county, in the country, or whatever it is. We need to promote images of people doing the message, and there are a lot of examples of that organizations have used as well. And we need to try to show that more people are doing the action as well, so that more people will come on board and maintain the momentum. We need to show that people approve of the action. We can do that by staff surveys or getting feedback from people. We don't want to be sort of presenting this sort of graphs. So this sort of graph was energy used in the library in a competition that was over in Leicester as part of a European program, and they converted that sort of graphs into this simple sort of icons on how they were performing on energy and water over the last 24 hours, over the last week or whatever it was. So green was good, red was bad, and different shades in between. And then they had their league table going on how the different libraries were doing and different centres were doing in the local authority. And they even had a sort of a coffee morning for the winner of the week or the month, and they had even their sort of iconic biscuits there that they gave to people at the coffee morning. So providing feedback is another way of engaging people, on resource use, on progress, on our achievements, on our actions, activities for the stakeholders, our target audiences. Try to avoid information overload and be positive. So they are basically the 4 E's of getting staff on board, of staff engagement, and try to make it fun as well in one way or another, energize in. And if you have a look at this slide, when you get it in more detail, it gives you some examples there of the different ways that you can apply to implementing these sort of 5 E's of behavior change or staff engagement in the workplace. So have a look at that when you get the slides. And of course, don't forget to launch your climate action plan. As we can see here, I think this was, not sure if it's South Dublin County Council, and get senior managers, senior management, CEO, whatever, to launch the climate action. You may have done this, already. I know a lot of you have done it, but then it's changing as we go, as we progress. So planning, setting objectives. What are we trying to achieve with communicating our climate action plan? What are the messages and any branding that we want to apply? What's our sort of basic, simple strategy? What are the tools, techniques, and measures that we need to apply to address the barriers, to address the behaviours that we've already encountered, and to target the particular target audiences that we want to address? What resources do we need? What are the media tools and techniques, as I mentioned? And what's our simple action plan? And can we pilot it in any way in a particular area or particular building in the local authority? So it's commit, identify, plan, implement, review. I didn't go into that in any detail, but I'm sure you're familiar with that process, and maintaining the momentum. Really, what we're talking about here is trying to identify maybe the systems of accountability that are already in place within your local authority, such as the business plans, the job descriptions, any codes of conduct or procedures, any induction, programs for new employees, the operating procedures, as I mentioned, staff performance evaluations, etc. And this is what Wicklow County Council, these are the sort of some of the systems of accountability that they identified in their climate action plan. It's a standing item on the agenda at management team meetings. I'm sure a lot of you are doing that already. It's integrated into our service delivery programs. It's part of our team development plans and personal development plans in each operational area. It's part of our safety statements in assessing climate-related risks, for example. It's integrated in all funding applications internally within the local authority. We have a green procurement strategy. We have particular conditions for this, which we can assess the impact on procurement. We have a climate and biodiversity special policy committee, for example, We're providing update on progress with the climate adaptation strategy and the CE monthly report, etc. So these are sort of some of the systems of accountability that they identified in Wicklow County Council, where we need to try to get climate action into those systems if we can. So that's, you know, the responsibility of the management team, the line managers, the human resources, the health and safety, maybe the head of finance, we've heard about them already, section heads, directors of services, corporate services, again, finance. And, you know, so there are some of the areas that, you know, the stakeholders basically that I've mentioned already that we need to try to get involved in the program, and the systems of accountability that we need to try to implement climate action into, in terms of trying to maintain the momentum. So that brings us to the end of the presentation. Thank you very much.
Brian, just a question there from Mary. She says, with 31 local authorities, should these messages not be consistent to the public? I think they should be, and we should be looking at some sort of coordinated national communications. So that's a very good point, Mary. And at the start there, Brian asked people just to make a note of any sort of 2 examples that they were going to take away from that presentation and that they could build into their climate action planning. Could you put in the chat there, anyone, some of the ideas? And then I will do a short summary of the top tips, and that will sort of close off the formal session. So anyone taken any notes or any particular strategies that other organizations have used that they like the way they've done it? Nobody taking anything away from
infograms, infographics.
Infographics, yeah. I'd be a bit worried, Brian, if no one was taking any details away with them. Okay.
Leaders and line managers, yeah.
Excellent,
Definitely.
excellent. So these are just this is top tips. There's 7 tips in here, and it's really a summary of both of our presentations this morning. So the first one then, with some great research organisations in Ireland. We got this a Climate Ireland website. That's where you should be pulling your information from for your campaigns, both internally and externally. So you're getting all your facts and figures from trusted sources. So we recommend that one. Obviously, we need to stress the solutions as well as the problems through your CCAP. You know, if you can, make it visual. How do people need to respond? What do they need to do? Again, Brian touched on that, you know, we've done a lot so far. Here's what we've done, and now this is what we're asking of you. So try and present that. And you know, your job is a climate job. As the climate officer, when you start talking about climate, someone might say to you, well, isn't that your job? Well, no, it's everybody's job. And just an example there of job descriptions, explaining to people why their job is a climate job. So you really need to sort of communicate roles and responsibilities, hopefully again with that sort of middle management scene within the organisation supporting you 100%. And then you need to upskill your staff on climate literacy. And one of the things the ESB did, first of all, they wanted to explain to staff what transition meant to the ESB as an organisation from a sort of a polluting emitter into a clean grid and decarbonisation of the grid. Then they had workshops. What was the team contribution to decarbonisation? And then they had a final workshop then where there was an emphasis on personal low carbon leadership. So every member of staff felt they had a role. So that was a very nice structured approach. And as I said earlier, you know, while we might be staff in local authorities, we're still members of the community, so we can promote what the council is doing once we go back into our community. Also, there's lots of benefits when you're selling the good life that surely will come to us if we clean up all this polluting fuels we're using, and make good use of the co-benefits. Get costs if you can. That material is available. You might have to do a bit of research, but these are the sort of messages we need to be bringing from our organizations into the communities. This is why we're making a difference. So we need to leverage all those co-benefits in terms of not just emissions, but all the positive things that does in society as well. We had this slide, Tommy Ryan there, strong messengers with strong messages. Okay, so we need good people to stand up and explain why we're doing these things and how we're going to do them and our role in them. And then the final slide then, oops, that was the final slide. Okay, 6 tips there. So that should be that's more of a summary really of some of the material we covered. So I hope you haven't been too overwhelmed. We have covered a lot of ground in terms of the presentations. So I'll just sort of open it up now, just with a couple of minutes there. And any comments on that? I mean, does that give you a good steer of where you need to be going with your climate action plans, particularly on the communication side of it?
I might just stop the recording there
Yeah.
now, Noel and Brian, just
Okay.
in case people might be more comfortable.
Okay. Okay.